As a global community, we need to be reducing greenhouse gas emissions by between 50 to 80% by 2050, and agriculture should be making a proportionate contribution to this reduction. There's been a great deal of work underway, both for the agricultural sector in general and for livestock in particular, as to how we might do this. And for livestock, a lot of work revolves around grazing management, better feeding of livestock, better breeding animals to be more productive so they produce more meat or milk for fewer emissions. Lots of other things, and all these measures are really, really important and essential, but they of themselves will not be sufficient to allow us to achieve that substantial decrease. The reason being that current trends, anticipated trends in production and consumption, suggest that the overall amount of livestock products being produced worldwide will nearly double by 2050. And that's partly because there'll be more people on the planet, 9 billion by 2050, and partly because each of those more people will be consuming more. So if we're really going to be serious about trying to tackle the rise in emissions, we need to be challenging our trajectories of consumption and reducing, at least not necessarily, depending on where you are in the world, reducing your consumption of animal source foods or reducing the rate of increase. And of course the issues are very, very different depending on where you are in the world and who you are in the world and what else you have to eat. So if you take, for example, the UK, where levels of meat and milk consumption are about 80 kilos per person per year, that's of meat, and as much as 200 kilos of milk per person per year, and you compare that with the quantities of meat consumed in Kenya, where I think meat consumption is very low at about 8 kilos per person per year, so it's a tenfold difference. Obviously there are different strategies. In the West there can be win-wins between measures to reduce consumption and health outcomes, whereas in Kenya access to meat and milk can be absolutely, invaluable, particularly for the vulnerable, such as the young and the elderly. So we have a very difficult challenge facing us. On the one hand, we need to improve global food security. On the other, we need to be reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And so we need to think, how might we develop agricultural policies that are mindful of the nutritional dimensions, and how do we develop nutrition policies that are mindful of the agriculture and greenhouse gas dimensions, and how can we define a role for animal source foods that is optimal without developing countries aping the patterns of the West, and how can we get Western populations to fairly dramatically reduce their consumption of these foods.